I never thought my own brother would put me in this position. And worse, I never imagined how I'd react. How do you explain something like this? How do you find the words for something that shakes you to your core? That makes you question everything, your morals, your limits, even yourself. It's strange how life works. You think you know right from wrong. You think some lines could never be crossed. But then, one moment changes everything. And before you even realize it, you're standing at the edge of something you don't understand, heart pounding, mind racing, knowing that one step too far could ruin everything. I should have seen the signs. The way things shifted. The looks that lingered just a little too long. The conversations that felt different, heavier. I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself it was nothing. But loneliness is dangerous. It makes you crave things you shouldn't. It makes you blind to the danger until it's too late. And when someone you trust, makes you feel seen again, you don't stop to think. You don't question it. You just take it. It started with a conversation. Just words. Just familiar, harmless words. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But looking back, that was the moment. The moment I should have walked away. I didn't. And that's why I'm here. Telling you this. Because maybe you understand. Maybe you've felt that pull towards something you shouldn't want. Maybe you've been in a moment that made you question yourself. And if you have, I need to know. Have you ever been in a situation where a line you thought was unbreakable suddenly started to blur? Has anyone ever crossed a line you never thought possible? Tell me in the comments. And before we go further, before I take you into the moment that changed everything, make sure you're subscribed. Because trust me, this is only the beginning. I'm 28 years old. Married, if you can call it that. I remember when I used to believe in love. The kind of love that makes your heart race, that makes you feel alive. But somewhere along the way, mine disappeared. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, like a candle burning down, until one day, I looked around and realized there was nothing left. My husband, David, is a good man. At least, that's what people say. Hardworking, responsible, reliable. He provides, pays the bills, keeps things in order. But that's all he does. We live in the same house, but it feels like we're worlds apart. He talks, but not to me. He smiles, but never at me. I could be a stranger sleeping beside him, and sometimes, I think I am. I used to try. I really did. I made his favorite meals, planned little dates, wore things I knew he used to love. But after a while, the silence between us became louder than anything I could do to fix it. And so, I stopped trying. Stopped hoping. Stopped feeling. Until he came back. My brother, Jake, had been gone for years. Moved across the country, built a life, fell in love. And then, like life always does, it all fell apart. A breakup. A bad one. The kind that knocks the wind out of you, that makes you question who you are. He didn't talk about it much, just said he needed a fresh start. Needed to be around family again. So he moved back home, and just like that, he was in my life again. Jake and I have always been close. Even as kids, he was the one who looked out for me. When I got picked on at school, he was the one who stood up for me. When I cried, he was the one who wiped my tears. And even as we got older, as life pulled us in different directions, that bond never broke. He was my safe place. My constant. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone saw me again. It wasn't anything at first. Just laughter. Just memories. Just old habits creeping back in. He'd tease me like he used to. Call me kid, even though I was only 2 years younger. He'd notice things no one else did, like when I changed my hair, or when I was too quiet, lost in my thoughts. He asked me about things my husband hadn't in years, how I was feeling, what I wanted, if I was happy. And then, there were the little things. The way he'd brush a piece of hair from my face when I wasn't expecting it. The way his arm would linger just a second longer when he hugged me goodbye. The way his eyes held something I couldn't name, something I didn't want to name. I told myself I was imagining it. That it was just Jake being Jake. But deep down, I knew better. Deep down, I felt it too. I should have pulled away. I should have created distance. But I didn't. Because for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen. I was heard. I was wanted. And that feeling? That feeling is dangerous. It happened at dinner. A normal night, a normal table, the same faces I'd seen 1,000 times. My husband sat across from me, half present, scrolling through his phone between bites, barely looking up when someone spoke. It was nothing new. I was used to being invisible. Jake sat beside me. Close, but not too close. Just enough that I could feel the warmth of him. Just enough that when he laughed, it sent a ripple through me. And God, it had been so long since I'd felt something like that. Since someone had looked at me like I was there, like I was real. We were talking about something meaningless, something light. My mother was going on about a show she'd started watching. My father nodded along, pretending to listen. And then Jake said something. A joke. Something teasing, something playful, something just between us. I don't even remember what it was. But I remember the way I laughed. I remember the way he looked at me when I did. It was different. Not the way a brother looks at a sister. Not the way a friend looks at a friend. It was something else. Something charged. Something alive. I felt it in my stomach first, then in my chest, then everywhere. It hit me so fast I could barely breathe. And then, just like that, it was gone. A blink. A second. A shift of his eyes away from mine. But it had already happened. And we both knew it. I turned back to my plate, my hands suddenly unsteady. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. My skin felt hot, flushed. I was thinking too much. Overanalyzing. That's what I told myself. But the way my breath caught in my throat told me the truth. That moment. It was real. After dinner, my husband disappeared into his office. Like always. No, thank you for dinner. No glance in my direction. Just his usual retreat into his own world. And just like that, I was alone again. Or at least, I should have been. Jake stayed behind. He helped me with the dishes. He stood close, his arm brushing against mine as he reached for a plate. I should have stepped away. I should have made space between us. But I didn't. I stayed right there, heart pounding, stomach twisting, hands shaking just enough for me to notice. You okay? He asked, voice low, like he already knew the answer. I nodded too quickly. Yeah, just tired. A lie. He knew it. I knew it. But he didn't press. He just looked at me, really looked at me, like he was waiting for something. I didn't know what. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't want to say it. I turned away, started drying a dish. My hands were damp, unsteady. He reached out, took the towel from me, fingers brushing mine. Just for a second. Just long enough. He doesn't see you, does he? I froze. My breath caught. The words, so simple, so quiet, hit me like a slap. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was too big, too real, too dangerous. Jake exhaled, shaking his head like he was angry. Not at me. At him. At the way my husband had just walked away like I didn't exist. At the way he always did. And then, softer, almost like he wasn't sure if he should say it. If he doesn't appreciate you, someone else will. The air changed. The whole room changed. I gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white, body stiff. I should have said something. Laughed it off. Shut it down. But I didn't. Because in that moment, something shifted. Something I couldn't take back. That night, I lay in bed beside my husband, listening to his steady breathing, staring at the ceiling, feeling nothing. Except for one thing. Except for the weight of Jake's words, still clinging to my skin like a ghost, refusing to leave. It was nothing. That's what I told myself. I was tired. Overthinking. Making something out of nothing. He's my brother. My brother. The one who used to chase away my nightmares when I was little. The one who carried me on his back when my legs were too tired to walk home. The one who always made me feel safe. Safe. That's what he was supposed to be. But then why? Why did it feel like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't name? I tried to push it away. Tried to forget the way he looked at me in the kitchen. The way his voice had dropped just slightly when he said those words. The way my stomach tightened when he did. But the harder I tried, the worse it got. Because every time I looked at my husband, I felt the weight of it. The weight of how different it was. The silence between us. The distance. The way he never asked how I was. Never touched me unless it was routine, expected, empty. I wanted to hate him for it, wanted to blame him, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just him. It was both of us. We had let it get this way. We had let the love drain out, little by little, until all that was left was obligation and habit. And Jake? Jake wasn't obligation. He wasn't habit. He was something else entirely. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Or maybe they had always been there, and I was just allowing myself to see them now. The way he leaned in just slightly when I spoke. The way his eyes lingered a second too long. The way his voice softened when he said my name. I told myself it was harmless. That it didn't mean anything. That nothing had happened, so nothing was wrong. It's not cheating if nothing happens, right? It's not a betrayal if it stays in my head. If I never say it out loud. If I never act on it. But then why did it feel like a betrayal? Why did it feel like every glance, every touch, every second we spent alone carried a weight I couldn't ignore? At night, when the house was quiet, when my husband lay beside me, lost in his own world, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts running in circles. I told myself I was imagining it. That it was just a phase. A stupid crush. A temporary distraction from a marriage that felt more like a prison than a partnership. But the thoughts wouldn't leave. The memories wouldn't fade. The way I felt when he looked at me seen, alive, wanted, kept replaying in my mind, over and over, like a song I couldn't turn off. And the worst part? The part that kept me up at night, twisting the sheets in my fists, staring at the clock as the hours passed? I didn't want it to stop. It wasn't a single moment. Not one big event that changed everything. It was slow, creeping, quiet. A series of tiny shifts, each one small enough to ignore, until suddenly, I couldn't ignore them anymore. It started with touches. Nothing obvious, nothing anyone would question. A hand on my back as he passed by. A brush of fingers when we reached for the same thing. A hug that lasted just a second too long, that held something unspoken between us. Something neither of us acknowledged, but both of us felt. Then, the conversations changed. They stopped being about the past, about childhood memories and old jokes. They became deeper. He started asking me questions no one else did. Are you happy? I should have said yes. I should have smiled, brushed it off, kept my guard up. But instead, I hesitated. And that hesitation was enough. Enough for him to see the cracks. Enough for him to press just a little further. Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if things were different? I swallowed hard. Looked away. But my silence was already an answer. And he knew it. We never talked about my husband. Not directly. But he was always there, a shadow between us, a wall that was getting thinner by the day. And Jake, he wasn't just standing on the other side of that wall anymore. He was leaning against it, testing it, waiting for it to crumble. One night, it almost did. It was late. Too late. Everyone had gone to bed. But we were still up, sitting on the couch, talking in low voices, like we were afraid the night itself was listening. I don't even remember how it happened. One second, we were laughing about something stupid, something meaningless, and the next, there was silence. A heavy, loaded silence, thick with everything we hadn't said. And then, he reached for my hand. It wasn't fast, wasn't rushed. Just slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed mine, hesitated, then held on. A small thing. A nothing thing. But it felt like everything. I should have pulled away. Every voice in my head screamed at me to pull away. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at our hands, feeling my heart beat in my throat, my skin burning where he touched me. When I finally looked up, his eyes were on me. Dark. Searching. Waiting. And then, he leaned in. It was just a shift. Just a fraction of an inch. But I felt it. Felt the air tighten. Felt the moment tip, like a scale about to break. And for the briefest, most terrifying second, I wanted him to close the distance. I wanted it. That realization hit me like a punch. I jerked back, breath unsteady, heart slamming against my ribs. His hand slipped from mine, his jaw tightening, his own breath unsteady. But he didn't apologize. He didn't look away. He just watched me, waiting for me to say something, do something, give him something. I didn't. I stood up. I walked away. I went to my bedroom, climbed into bed beside my husband, turned off the light, and stared into the darkness, my hands still trembling, my lips still tingling from a kiss that never happened. I thought that night would be the end of it. That if I just walked away, if I pretended it never happened, it would go away. That it was just a moment of weakness, just my loneliness playing tricks on me. That if I ignored it, it would disappear. But it didn't. If anything, it got worse. Because now, there were no more excuses. No more pretending. No more convincing myself I was imagining things. That moment on the couch, it had taken everything we hadn't said and dragged it into the light. And once you see something for what it really is, you can't unsee it. Jake didn't avoid me after that night. He didn't act guilty or awkward. If anything, he was bolder. His eyes held mine longer. His touches lingered. The tension that had been simmering between us for weeks was now at a boil, threatening to spill over at any second. And then, one night, it did. It was late again. Too late. The kind of late where the world feels quiet, where everything slows down and the air feels heavier, thicker. I was in the kitchen, standing by the sink, staring at my reflection in the window. I looked different. Not physically, but something in my eyes. Something raw. Something restless. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Slow. Measured. My stomach tightened. My breath caught. And then he was there, standing just a little too close, just like he always did now. "Can we talk?" he asked. I turned, gripping the counter behind me like it was the only thing keeping me upright. "Jake, no more pretending," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Something that made my pulse race. "I know you feel it too." I shook my head. "It doesn't matter." He took a step closer. My breath hitched. My fingers dug into the counter. "It matters to me," he said. I felt trapped. Not by him, but by the truth. The truth that I had been running from, the truth that he was now forcing me to face. The truth that every time I was near him, I felt something I wasn't supposed to feel. "Tell me to leave, and I will," he said. His voice was quiet now, almost a whisper. "Tell me this is all in my head, that you don't feel anything, and I'll walk away. But if you can't," he let the words hang there. Let them settle between us like a loaded gun. I opened my mouth. Closed it. I wanted to say it. Wanted to tell him to leave, to walk away, to end this before it went too far. But the words wouldn't come. Because it wasn't in his head. And we both knew it. He reached out then. Slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed my arm. Just a touch. Just a nothing touch. But I felt it everywhere. And for a second, just 1 second, I leaned into it. That was all it took. His hand slid up, fingers curling around my wrist, his touch warm, steady. My pulse was racing. My breath was uneven. Every part of me was screaming to stop this. To push him away. To walk out of the kitchen and never look back. But I didn't move. He took another step. Close enough that I could feel the heat of him. Close enough that I could see the way his chest was rising and falling too fast, just like mine. Close enough that if I just tilted my head, if I just closed the last inch between us, a door slammed upstairs. We jumped apart like we had been burned. Footsteps. Heavy. Coming down the stairs. My husband. Jake's eyes flickered to mine. He didn't move. Neither did I. Then, the footsteps stopped. Silence. A long, stretched silence that made my heart pound so hard I thought it would give me away. And then, my husband turned and walked into his office. Shut the door. The moment broke. I sucked in a shaky breath. My hands were trembling. Jake stepped back, running a hand through his hair, exhaling hard like he had just come up for air. "We can't do this," I whispered. My voice barely worked. He nodded, but there was something in his eyes. Something unreadable. Something dangerous. And as he turned and walked away, I knew. This wasn't over. Everything changed after that night. Jake pulled away first. I should have been relieved. I should have been grateful that he was giving me space, that he was letting things settle back to where they were supposed to be. But instead, all I felt was the emptiness where he used to be. He stopped lingering in the kitchen after dinner. Stopped standing too close, stopped looking at me in that way that made my heart catch in my throat. When we sat in the same room, he kept his distance, physically, emotionally, in every way that mattered. And for the first time, I understood what it felt like to truly lose something you never even had. The house felt colder. Not because of him, not really. But because without him, I saw my marriage for exactly what it was. A hollow space. A life built on routine, not love. A partnership in name only. I tried to act normal. Tried to pretend nothing had changed. But David noticed. Not in the way I wanted him to. Not in the way that would have meant he still cared. No, he noticed in the way someone notices a shift in the weather, acknowledging it, but not really concerned. He asked if I was tired, if I was feeling okay. I nodded, forced a smile. He kissed my forehead like I was a child and went back to whatever was more important than me. And that was when I knew. It wasn't that I had almost betrayed him. It wasn't that I had let another man, my own brother, make me feel something I wasn't supposed to feel. It was that he never even saw it coming. He never even felt the shift. Because he wasn't paying attention. Because he hadn't been paying attention in years. Jake and I barely spoke after that. When we did, it was polite. Empty. A conversation between acquaintances, not two people who had come dangerously close to something irreversible. I hated it. I hated how much I missed him, how much I wanted to go back, not to before the moment in the kitchen, but before the distance. Before the silence. But maybe this was how it had to be. Maybe this was the price of almost making the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe this was what I deserved. Family gatherings were the worst. Sitting across from him at the dinner table, pretending I didn't feel his presence in every breath I took. Pretending not to notice the way he avoided looking at me, the way he laughed at jokes that weren't funny just to fill the silence. I wondered if anyone else could feel it. The tension. The invisible line we were both so carefully avoiding. I thought it would get easier with time. That eventually, the weight of it would fade. That one day, I would wake up and it wouldn't hurt anymore. But weeks passed. Then months. And the ache was still there. Because the truth is, I wasn't mourning the mistake we almost made. I was mourning the way he made me feel. I lost something that was never really mine to begin with. And somehow, that made it hurt even more. Jake didn't belong to me. He never did. But for a brief moment, for a fleeting, dangerous second, it felt like maybe, just maybe, he could have. And now, that possibility was gone. And in its place was something I didn't know how to live with. Silence. I told myself it was for the best. That I had done the right thing by walking away. That I had made the only choice I could have. But if that was true, why did it feel like I had lost a piece of myself in the process? I spent nights replaying everything. The moments, the touches, the glances. Every second I let myself get too close. Every time I let the tension build instead of stopping it. Every opportunity one had to set a boundary and didn't. I didn't cheat. That's what I kept telling myself. I didn't cross that final line. I didn't do the one thing that could have destroyed everything. But then, what was this feeling in my chest? This gnawing guilt? This unbearable ache? Because maybe I didn't cheat with my body, but I had done something worse. I had betrayed my husband with my heart. I didn't notice when it started. When the shift happened. When my thoughts stopped being my own and started belonging to someone else. But I knew where it had led me. I had gone to bed next to one man while thinking about another. I had sought comfort in hands that weren't my husband's. I had let my loneliness drive me into something dangerous and then pretended I didn't know the road I was walking. I used to think infidelity was simple. A black and white line you either crossed or didn't. But now, I knew better. Now, I knew that betrayal wasn't always physical. Sometimes, it was in the way your pulse quickened when someone else walked into the room. In the way your heart leaned in a direction it wasn't supposed to. In the way you let someone else's words fill the emptiness inside you. So no, I didn't cheat. But did that make me innocent? I wasn't sure anymore. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I regretted it. Sometimes, the most dangerous affairs are the ones that never happen. Because the ones that do? At least they have an ending. At least there's a clear line drawn in the sand, a moment where the damage is done, where there's no more pretending. But the ones that never happen? They stay with you. They live in your head, in your chest, in the quiet moments when no one is looking. They become ghosts, haunting the spaces between what was and what could have been. And maybe that's what makes them worse. Because what do you do with a love that never had a chance to exist? With feelings that never had a place to go? Where do you put the longing, the regret, the ache that lingers even when the door has been closed? I don't have the answer. I don't know if I ever will. But I do know this. If I had made a different choice that night, if I had let myself fall, would I be feeling the same guilt I feel now? Or would it be a different kind? One with clearer consequences, but maybe less questions. I need to know. What would you have done? If you were me, standing there in that kitchen, with your heart telling you one thing and your mind telling you another, what choice would you have made? And here's a bigger question. Do you think emotional betrayal is as bad as physical? Because I used to think I knew the answer. I used to think there was only one kind of infidelity. But now, I'm not so sure. Let's talk in the comments. Tell me what you think. Because I know I'm not the only one who's been here. And if you want more real stories of infidelity, deception, and shocking betrayals, make sure you subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. These stories aren't just mine, they're ours. They're yours. They're real. And if you have a story of your own, send it to me. Because sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones we can't keep to ourselves.